Has anyone heard the verse about the crocodile trying to cross a river? And in trying to cross a river, you cling onto the crocodile. You know, does that make sense? Like, you know, stepping stones in a river, and you might see the crocodile. It looks like a stepping stone. You try and step on the crocodile to cross the river. What's going to happen to you potentially? Might not be a very happy ending there. Yeah, might not go too well. Oh, here we go. So this is Guru Vachaka Kovai, verse 125. Remember, Guru Vachaka Kovai is regarded as the best record of Bhagavan's teachings, his verbal teachings, his spoken teachings that we have. If you read the preface, which is written by the ashram, Ramana ashram, they say this. What do they say? Where's it gone? Oh, here we go. This treatise provides the most precise, systematic, and authoritative exposition of Sri Bhagavan's teaching, explaining step by step the theory, the practice, and the experience of pure jnana, the truth supreme, which is being as eternal life, pure awareness, perfect bliss. Thus, the most comprehensive collection of the Maharishi's sayings is Guru Vachaka Kovai, the garland of Guru's sayings, composed and strung together artistically by the poet Murugana. You remember Murugana, who was a devotee of Bhagavan's for over 20 years, collected the teachings that Bhagavan gave him, and those teachings that Murugana collected formed this text. So these are teachings of Bhagavan as recorded by Murugana, the most systematic explanation of Bhagavan's spoken teachings, because the best teachings, we could say, the deepest teachings are in silence. But this text is the next best thing. So these verses are recorded by Murugana, and Bhagavan checked them over. Almost all the verses he checked over, and some of them he edited when he didn't like what he saw or he wanted to change something. He edited the verses. But there are a few verses which were written by Bhagavan in here as well. So verse 125 is about this crocodile. There's a slight spin on it, the way I said it. It's slightly different, but the same idea. Verse 125. Like one who takes a crocodile for a boat and with its help tries to cross a river are those who, while they pamper the trivial flesh, means the body, claim they are also earnest seekers of the living self. Like one who takes a crocodile for a boat and with its help tries to cross a river are those who, while they pamper the trivial flesh, claim also that they are earnest seekers of the living self. And then here is a verse written by Bhagavan, which is immediately after verse 125, which is the same kind of idea, but Bhagavan's phrasing. Give up the thought that this frail body is the self. Pursue the self, which is eternal bliss. To seek it while cherishing the perishable body is like trying to cross a river using a crocodile for a raft. Give up the thought that this frail body is the self. See that phrasing? Give up the thought that this frail body is the self. That means stop thinking you are the body. You often see it phrased this way because of the translation. Give up the thought that this frail body is the self, meaning Stop thinking you are the body. Pursue the self, which is eternal bliss. It means be what you are. Eternal bliss, eternal happiness, that which never changes. That which is happy. That which is inherently full of peace without suffering. Go for that instead. Don't go for the body. Don't take yourself with the body and then try and find happiness. No. You're not the body. You are that. You are the, pursue the self. That means your own self, the subject, which is eternal bliss. To seek it while cherishing the perishable body is like trying to cross a river using a crocodile for a raft. This is the verse is called Sri Bhagavan 1. It's the first of the verses in Guru Vachaka Kovai that was written by Bhagavan that they've inserted into this position because verse 125 fits with this. So the arrangement of these verses was done later by different people under Bhagavan's sort of guidance. Maybe not under his guidance, but he said, can you arrange these verses? And they arranged the verses. Other people arranged the verses into a logical order. Murugan just wrote these down, and then somebody else arranged them and put them all in and showed it to Bhagavan. Now this metaphor is actually found in, this is almost a direct quote from a verse written by Shankara. That's not written in here, actually. It doesn't say that in here, but this is when I first read this, I immediately recognized the metaphor as, because I'd read Vivekachudamani, I'd read traditional Vedanta before I came across Bhagavan's teachings. So I immediately realized, oh, this is from Vivekachudamani. This is from Shankara's text, Vivekachudamani. So there's a verse somewhere in Vivekachudamani. In fact, let me try and find it. I'll be interested to see how it's phrased. I'll be back in a second. So we've got a more traditional translation, and it's verse 84 in Vivekachudamani. And it goes like this. Verse 84, whoever seeks to realize the self by devoting himself to the nourishment of the body proceeds to cross a river by catching hold of a crocodile, mistaking it for a log. See, that's verse 84. The next verse 85, it says this. So, for a seeker after liberation, the infatuation over things like the body is a dire death. He who has thoroughly conquered this deserves the state of freedom. So you can see the idea here is obsession about the body, and we can infer also about the mind and the world. Because when we're caring about the body, we're caring about the mind and the world as well. I hope you can see that. Preoccupation, overly being preoccupied with these things, impairs or hampers our ability for liberation. But the one who goes beyond these, according to Shankara, deserves liberation. That means they will get liberation. Then Ramana has also translated Vivekachudamani into Tamil for those people who couldn't read Sanskrit. He translated the whole text. And so we've also got, well, I'm reading the English translation of the Tamil, but it shows you Ramana's phrasing, Bhagavan's phrasing is slightly different. Let's see. The verse orders are slightly changed. In Bhagavan's translation, he hasn't done a verse by verse translation. He's done what they call a free translation, which means he's pretty much translated every single verse, but he's just sort of not word for word, just the meaning. This is what I'll start a few. Okay, I'll just read the verse that we're talking about. He who still cares for the body while seeking the self is like one who catches hold of a crocodile to cross a river. Infatuation with the body is indeed fatal to the aspirant after liberation. He who overcomes this infatuation attains liberation. So Bhagavan's much clearer in this rendition, at least. Infatuation with the body is indeed fatal to the aspirant after liberation. Remember, aspirant, to aspire for something means to seek it, to want it. So an aspirant is just a seeker. One who still cares for the body while seeking the self is like one who catches hold of a crocodile to cross a river. Infatuation with the body is indeed fatal to the aspirant after liberation. Only he who overcomes this infatuation attains liberation. Here, I'm just backing up a couple of verses in Bhagavan's translation. He says, this body is finally consumed, whether by earth, fire, beasts, or birds. This means the body is eventually going to die somehow. This body is finally consumed, whether by earth, fire, beast, or birds. He who, forgetting his real nature, meaning the omniscient, formless, ever-present divine spirit that you truly are. He who, forgetting his real nature, mistakes this body for the self, gets attached to it and cherishes it, and by doing so becomes the murderer of the self. And then it goes into the verse I've just read about the crocodile. Let me just see if it says that in the original, how that works. Yeah, it says the same thing pretty much. Basically says, if you start to think that you're a body and care for it, you're essentially committing suicide. I think it's a juxtaposition, you see, because they're saying the irony is by caring for the body, you're committing suicide. You see, which is it's Advaitic humor, I would say. You know, so normally is the opposite, right? But with this, on this path, you go towards the self, you discover who you are. That is the true life. By forgetting the self and cherishing yourself as a body, you're committing spiritual suicide. You're committing suicide. You're destroying, you're murdering the self. Obviously, the self cannot be murdered. It's eternal, it's deathless. It's what you are. But they're saying you're murdering the self. So there's a juxtaposition there for you, a bit of humor and rhetoric. Also very extreme teaching, isn't it? It's a very extreme teaching, I would say. It's so, it's not a lovey-dovey, fluffy teaching that's embracing everything, is it? So this is the traditional teaching that's been passed down for centuries. And that's been unchanged for millennia. It's the essential teaching. You'll find this kind of teaching also in the Bible and Christianity. And people who are attached to the body-mind, they find it very offensive. And understandably, it's very offensive because you're attacking their sense of who they are and what they value. So it makes sense. It is offensive in that sense, actually. But when you come to know yourself truly, then the attachment to body, mind, world naturally starts to slip away. It's very beautiful, natural, harmonious thing that we don't have to sort of worry about. In fact, if you don't worry about any of this, you just love Bhagavan, then this will come anyway. You don't have to worry about all this stuff. I'll read you another quote just because I've got it here as well. So this is also from Guru Vachaka Kovai, but I'm reading it from a different book. I'm reading it from this book here, which if you haven't got, I recommend you get it. It's called The 7 Steps to Awakening. And in chapter 2, there's a verse. Many of the verses from in this book or a good number of them are taken from Guru Vachaka Kovai. But I've just found it in this book. It's verse 234 in this book, The 7 Steps to Awakening. And you might notice a similar theme. The animal has changed. You'll know what I mean. Those who forget the harm the false world there before us does, and cling to it as real and comfortable, mistake, alas, a floating bear for a boat, only to be crushed and drowned in the sea of birth. Sea of birth means samsara, I'm assuming. Those who forget the harm the false world there before us does, and cling to it as real and comfortable, mistake, alas, a floating bear for a boat, only to be crushed and drowned in the sea of birth. This is one of Bhagavan's teachings. It's the same idea, right? But it's very interesting because those who forget the harm the world does, you know, when you're suffering, when you're going through a tough time, then you remember how horrible the world is, how treacherous it is, how much suffering it causes. But then what happens? You do a bit of self-inquiry, or you get a few spiritual insights. You feel great. You feel great. You start to feel really good. You start skipping down the streets, literally or metaphorically. You feel, oh, I've got this now. And what happens? You come back into the world. And you start to feel comfortable in the world. You think, I can, no matter what happens, I'm fine. You've come off the path, you see. Those who forget the harm the false world there before us does. The false world there before us, that's describing objects that appear to us, and cling to it as real and comfortable, mistake, alas, a floating bear. You see a bear in the river, you think, oh, it's a boat. You think it's a boat. Wonderful. Wonderful. There's a boat to ferry me across. Wonderful. It's like thinking this world is wonderful. All right. Again, it's a radical teaching that goes against pretty much everything society conditions us to believe. Mistaken as a floating bear for a boat, only to be crushed and drowned in the sea of birth. Yeah. And then the next verse in this book, 235. When will the fool who thinks that the body and the world are permanent and clings to them find peace? When will the fool who thinks the body and the world are permanent and clings to them find peace? Only when this folly leaves him, and he trusts, and like a limpet clings to that, the self within. Thenceforward he shall never know more pain. Okay, I'll do one more verse. I think I'll only do one more verse. 10 hours later. The next verse in the same book, verse 236 from the 7 Steps to Awakening. Do get this book if you haven't got it already. Only by courtesy is the body, vulnerable and born to die, called an entity substantial. The sole reality, the only thing permanent and ultimate, is self-awareness, that alone. So I'm not sure if the meaning of this verse comes across when I read it out. Only by courtesy is the body, vulnerable and born to die, called an entity substantial. This means only by courtesy do we call the body something substantial. Only from convention, only out of courtesy, only out of politeness, only as a concession to the seeker do we say, yes, there is a body. Yeah, only out of courtesy. This is how the teachings work. The teachings are courteous, unless they're telling you that you're going to be crushed and drowned in the sea of birth by grabbing hold of the floating bear. Yeah, they can be. They're not always courteous, but they're usually courteous. They acknowledge that they're talking to a body mind or somebody who thinks they're a body mind. Only by courtesy is the body, vulnerable and born to die, called an entity substantial. But then the truth is given to us. The sole reality, the only thing permanent and ultimate, is self-awareness. That alone means actually the only thing that actually exists is consciousness, is awareness, yourself. Self-awareness, it says here, meaning the self. That alone, meaning there is no body. We can infer the meaning is there is no substantial body. There is no substantial mind. There is no substantial world. And we can take out the word substantial. There is no body. There is no mind. There is no world. There is only the self, which is none of these three. It's about to read the next verse, by the way, just so you know. Thank you for allowing me to read to you and speak to you in this way. We're not ending satsang yet. We've got another half an hour. But it is a privilege for me to be able to speak to anyone about these sorts of things, which are taboo in our society for the most part. Even amongst spiritual groups, these sorts of teachings are often frowned upon and taboo. I don't wish to force my views or Bhagavan's teachings onto anybody. So if you are here and willingly listening, I want to say thank you to you for being here. It's an honor. Thank you. It's an honor. It's a privilege to be able to share these beautiful, liberating, wonderful, radical teachings that are seldom found. They're very rare. Have I mentioned that to you before? They're very rare teachings, in my experience at least. Bhagavan gave teachings on many different levels. Not all his teachings are the highest teaching. In this book here, we've got the highest teachings have been collated. So that's why I'm saying get a copy of this book if you haven't already. If you have got a copy of it, I recommend you read it. It's got an introductory chapter, which you should read. Then there's 7 chapters. At the beginning of each of the 7 chapters is an introductory paragraph or 2, which you should read. And then there are the quotes. I haven't read all the quotes in this book. I'll be honest, I haven't at all. I personally just like to read the ones that Ramana wrote, which are usually the first section in every chapter. But it doesn't matter. All the quotes in this book are very, very good. And what he's done, he's taken out the lower teachings, which are distortions, in the sense that if you're looking for the higher teachings, they are distortions. The lower teachings are wonderful when you have somebody who's not accepting the higher teachings and they need a lower teaching to help them bridge the gap. In this way, distorted teachings even are very useful, because distorted teachings help people bridge the gap. Probably most of you here would have been through many different types of teaching before you come here. And we can give thanks to all those other teachings, lower teachings, higher teachings, distorted teachings, wonderful teaching, whatever you want to call them. We can give thanks to them all because they help us. So we're not against distorted or other teachings. But if you're looking for higher teachings, I highly recommend this book, 7 Steps to Awakening, as compiled by Michael Langford. Many of the quotes in here are from Bhagavan, but from other places too. So buy it, read it. I've told a few of you that all you have to do, because there's an introduction, which is about 10 pages long, and there's 7 chapters, and each of the 7 chapters have a whole selection of quotes that essentially say the same thing. All you've got to do is read the first 10 pages of the introduction, and then read the first couple of pages of each chapter. And that's basically the whole book you've read. It's a total of probably about 30 or 40 pages. So you could read the whole thing in terms of the essential content, in an hour, in half an hour. But of course, and maybe you want to do that, but then of course the idea is to go back and just pick a verse you like and just read that. In the introduction, Michael Langford writes how he suggests we should read the quotes. I'll read it to you actually. It's very good. He says, how to read the quotes. Okay. There's a whole section he writes about this. I'm just going to read to you. He says, after you read a quote, ask yourself these 2 questions. A, what is the purpose of this quote? What is the purpose of this quote? B, what would I have to do to put this purpose into practice? What is the purpose of this quote? What would I have to do to put this purpose into practice? He suggests you ask these 2 questions for every quote you read. And I'd recommend that too. He goes further. He says you should write down the answers to these 2 questions. And that's probably good advice as well. I haven't done that. But there you go. I haven't even read all the quotes in the book, so. So I've done a lot of talking today. Again, thank you for allowing me to talk to you this way.